Another type of linkage that can affect genetic outcomes is known as sex linkage. Sex linkage occurs because the X and the Y chromosome are not homologous. Look at these two chromosomes. They are not the same size, they are not the same shape, and they do not carry the same genes. The X chromosome carries over 1,000 genes that are needed for just normal body functioning. So everyone has an X chromosome. You can't live without it. The Y chromosome, on the other hand, only carries about 78 genes, and all of these genes are related to making the body male. These chromosomes are inherited in different patterns in females than in males, so the genes that are carried on those chromosomes are also inherited in different patterns in females than in males. Females have two X's. They inherit an X from both parents, while males have an X chromosome from mom and a Y chromosome that came from dad. Genes carried on the X or the Y chromosome are said to be sex-linked. Specifically, genes that are carried on the X chromosome are sometimes called X-linked, and genes carried on the Y chromosome are sometimes called Y-linked genes. Females inherit two copies of the X chromosome, so they can be homozygous for traits on the X chromosome, or they can be heterozygous for those traits. That means that females can be carriers for certain traits on the X chromosome without expressing those traits. Males, on the other hand, only have one copy of the X chromosome. So that means that whatever allele they inherit on that X chromosome is the one that will be expressed. There isn't a second X chromosome present to cover up the actions of the other allele. So males cannot be carriers for sex-linked traits. Because males can't be carriers for sex-linked traits, sex-linked disorders carried on the X or Y chromosomes tend to show up more frequently in males than in females. Let's look at some examples. Color vision is produced by three types of color receptors found on the back of the eye in an area called the retina. There are receptors for red, green, and blue. The genes for making these receptors are carried on the X chromosome. In red-green color blindness, an individual inherits an allele that results in either a defective red or green receptor. People with this type of color blindness have difficulty distinguishing between red and green colors. Because the gene for color blindness is sex-linked, females must inherit the defective allele from both parents in order to be colorblind. Females can also carry one allele for color blindness, but still have normal vision because the other X chromosome is carrying that normal vision gene. Males, on the other hand, only have to inherit the allele from one parent in order to be colorblind. That makes this condition much more common in males than in females. Because the gene is carried on the X chromosome, males inherit that gene from their mothers. This is a very common test for color blindness known as an Ishihara test. This image is made of a bunch of little circles, each containing a different shade of green or red. If you have normal color vision, a number should pop out at you. And I believe the number for this one is 96. If you do not have normal color vision, that number may be a little bit hard to make out, or you may see a different number altogether. This image demonstrates what it might be like to have red-green color blindness. On the left, we have a bush with red flowers on it. That's what people with normal vision see. For someone with red-green color blindness, that image might look like this. You can see that the entire background kind of looks green and the flowers don't pop out at you. It's difficult for people with this type of color blindness to distinguish between red and green hues. Another sex-linked disorder is hemophilia. Hemophilia is a bleeding disorder. People with this disorder don't make all of the proper clotting factors that they need in their blood and have difficulty forming blood clots when they cut themselves. People with hemophilia can also experience constant slow internal bleeding, which is a much larger problem. This disorder results in general weakness and malaise and can be fatal if the person really hurts themselves and can't stop bleeding. Now, this disorder was very famously carried in the Russian and European royal families back in the early 20th century. And there's a picture of them. Aren't they a happy looking bunch? Here's the pedigree chart or family tree for the British royal family from about that time. On this chart, circles represent females and squares represent males. This blue color indicates that an individual has inherited the gene for hemophilia. If it's completely filled in, it means the individual has hemophilia. If it's only half filled in, it means that the individual is a carrier for the gene but doesn't actually have hemophilia. Now let's look at the chart. You can see a couple of interesting things. First, you'll notice that there are a lot of blue squares on here, but there are no totally blue circles. This is because males are far more likely to have hemophilia than females because they only have to inherit that gene from one parent. They only inherit it from their mother. Females, on the other hand, can be carriers, so you do see a lot of female carriers, but you don't see any female hemophiliacs in this tree because none of the males happen to pass that on to their daughters. Another interesting thing you'll notice is that we can track this mutation back to its original source, and that just so happens to be Queen Victoria. She is the first person who carried this mutation into the family, and you can see that it persisted for several generations. So all of this sex linkage stuff begs the question, how do females cope with having two copies of the X chromosome when really only one is necessary? Well, the answer is something called X chromosome inactivation. It turns out that when a female is still a very young embryo, just a little ball of cells really, one of the X chromosomes in some of the cells will curl up into a little wad called a Barr body, and that deactivates it. With that X chromosome deactivated, it allows the other X chromosome to be in charge. In other parts of the embryo, the other X chromosome will curl up into a Barr body and allow the other X chromosome to be in charge of that area of the embryo. This all means that a female's body is really a mosaic of the two X chromosomes, with one of them being in charge of some parts of the body and the other being in charge of other parts of the body. We see a really great visual example of this in certain breeds of cats. In cats, there are two alleles for fur color, and they're both carried on the X chromosome. There's an allele for black fur and an allele for orange fur. Because female cats have two copies of the X chromosome, they have to inherit the black allele from both parents in order to be black in color. The same thing goes for orange. They have to inherit two orange alleles from each parent, one from each parent, in order to be orange in color. Females that are heterozygous for orange and black are calico, also known as tortoiseshell. Now, these black and orange patches are kind of interesting. The orange patches indicate areas of the skin in which the X chromosome carrying the orange gene is in charge. The black chromosome has been silenced in those areas. The black patches indicate areas of the skin where the X chromosome carrying the black gene is in charge and the orange gene has been silenced. So again, this is a great visual example because you can actually see the parts of the body in which one X chromosome is in charge over the other. Now, because male cats only have one copy of the X chromosome, they're only going to inherit one of the fur color alleles. So male cats are typically either orange or black, but you don't see male calico cats. There are some rare examples of male calico cats, and this occurs when they have two X chromosomes and a Y, something that in humans is called Klinefelter syndrome.